but he knew what he needed to do, and he was at the bottom of the barrel. I want you to remember that as we go through this in just a moment. I want to share with you just a little bit. You heard just a little bit of story. I want to take you through, it's hard to say, I didn't realize I was 40, but I'm going to take you through about 40 years in about 40 seconds here, really fast, just to kind of give you the up to where we are today moment. I was born into a military family. I'm not sure if any of you served, but if you did, thank you so much for your service. I was a military brat, if you will. My dad served for 30 years. I am the fourth child in a family that was designed for three, if you know what I mean. That came along a little late in life for him, but everything from my dad was yes, sir, no, sir. My dad was a fixer. As a result, I'm a fixer. If something goes wrong, I'll fix it. I mean, I kind of relate to Jeff Foxworth. I'm not sure if you ever heard about him when he was growing up through school. You know, Jeff Foxworth, he said when he was a kid, man, he was all over the place in school. He was running around, couldn't sit down, going over here, going over here, going over there. And finally his teachers had it, and they called in his mom and dad to the principal's office. And they got to the principal's office. He called his dad, had to leave work and go in there and sit down with him. And they said, Mr. Foxworth, we got a little problem with your son. He said, he's up and down in his seat all the time. He's talking all the time. He's always disruptive. And his dad said, that's okay, we'll take care of that. He said, no, you don't understand. He's been tested, and we've discovered that Jeff has ADD. And his daddy said, well, I don't know what that is, but he ain't going to have it tomorrow. I might have had it when I was younger, but it went away one day. I don't know. I understand that, but my dad was about that way. He was a no-nonsense guy, and he fixed things when things went wrong and fixed them. Well, I was trying to fix a lot of things in my life on my own, but October 31st, 1976, I realized I could not fix my sin. That was the day I went to a FCA event where a guy by the name of Bull Brandon, they called him the Bull. He came and shared his testimony. He was one of the very first baseball and football professional players. He was quite a man. He shared Christ with me, and I changed my life. In 1986, I was called into the ministry and graduated from the University of Georgia. I went to Spartanburg, South Carolina, where I served as the minister of recreation for nearly 10 years. And in 1995, we had so many kids that were playing upward sports that the Lord called us, asked us to step out on faith and to start this not-for-profit ministry where we would begin to share the love of Jesus through something as simple as a ball in churches. So I shared it with a few of my friends, and the next year we had 7 churches, and then we had 64, and then we had 127, and 330, and 500, and within 8 years we had 1,000 churches, and in 10 years we had 2,000 churches, and the list just kept going on, and it was incredible to see what was going on during that time, and the reality of it is during those times, in that season of life, and really I don't ever remember a time, I honestly and truly could not tell you a time before that if you came up to me and I never knew you, or if I've known you all my life, and you said to me, hey, how's it going? I would have said to you, I'm on top of the world. You can mess somebody up by doing that, man. I mean, you ever gone into a grocery store and somebody said, how you doing? I'm on top of the world. And they go, really? Yeah, I'm on top of the world. This is awesome. I love it. And they're like, well, that's a good answer. I said, that's not a good answer. I said, where I am? I'm just on top of the world. I'm loving it. I am loving life. I'm having the time of my life. And it's really interesting because in that moment, one of the things that was going on at our church is our church and the church family were going through this book called The Story. I don't know if you've ever heard the book called The Story, but The Story is the Bible in about 30 chapters. It's chronological, and they've broken down these 30 chapters into the big 30. And so it starts off with creation, and it takes you to Adam and Eve, and then to Noah, and then you eventually get into Abraham, and you start getting into some of the things like Joseph and Moses and all these different stories, and you get into David and where all these things come along. Before long, you get into the New Testament, and you start hearing about all the disciples and John the Baptist, and Jesus comes on the scene, and Peter, and then you eventually get to Paul, and you just hear this story. Well, there's 30 chapters, and it was really cool to look at this book. If you haven't read it, just pick it up. It's just like you're reading through the chronological version of the Bible. It's phenomenal. And our whole church was going to do this from kindergarten all the way through senior adults. And in the process of developing all this, they realized that we had a huge number of people, that this was about 7 years ago, we had a huge number of people that used to come to church and Sunday school back in the day, not life groups, but Sunday school, and they dropped out of Sunday school, and now they just come to church. And they said, we want all these people to come back and re-engage while we're going through the story. And so they called me and they said, Kaz, we want you to teach the class of all the people that have dropped out. We're going to invite them. We want you to send them a letter, see if they'll come to our dining hall, which looks like this. And it doesn't matter if they're in 4th grade or whether they're in their senior adults, 90s. We want them all to come, and we want you to teach the class. And I thought, first of all, it's very humbling. I said, but thank you. I said, but why me? And they said, well, mainly because you qualify. You haven't been to Sunday school in quite a while. We need you to come back. So anyway, we were having a hard time finding the right place for us, but they wanted me to do that. So in the process of reading through the story, this is one of the things that I discovered in the story. This story that we read, that you have in the Bible, whether it's in that book, the story, or the Bible in which you have, this story is God's story. It's God's story. But along the journey, you hear Adam and Eve's story, which are part of God's story, and Noah's story, which is a small piece of God's story, and Abraham's story, which is a small piece of that story. And on the list goes from Joseph all the way down to Jesus, and even Peter and Paul and all these different ones. And you realize all these people, you start reading through the Bible and studying the Bible, we get in these moments like this, and quite frankly, we can look at that and think that they're fictional characters in a book. They're not. They're real people. And it's God's story. And guess what? When you finish reading that book, the story continues to 2021. And guess what? You are in the story. You are a part of God's story. And this is God's story that will continue after we're gone. And 1,000 years from now, we're going to be able to look back and somebody is going to talk about your piece, whether it be 50 years or 100 years, 5 years or 105 years. Your story is a part of God's story. And when I realize that those people are real and my story is just a part of God's story and there's a whole lot more story going on, He wants to use my story and your story to share Jesus with more people so that they have a story to keep telling as this moves on. So what I'm about to share with you is my story as a part of God's story in the big picture of history. So I'm reading this, we're going through this, and for whatever reason, I'll never forget the moment as I was preparing my message during one of these Sundays about 7 years ago about my story, and I realized this biblical truth that God revealed to me. It's not rocket science by any means, but it was so powerful that it began to weave its way in to every single part of the Bible for the rest of the messages that I began to share. And this was it. As I was reading about some of the Israelite kings that made terrible decisions that impacted people like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or the brothers of Joseph that betrayed him and made terrible decisions that had an incredible, terrible impact on their brother Joseph, who had nothing to do with anything. But what was going on was everything that happens to us in our life falls into one of two categories. Consequences or circumstances. You see, consequences are things that happen to us because of decisions that we've made. Now, I'm going to say something. All of us have made bad decisions, and everybody here knows when you make a bad decision, there's a consequence that's coming. Like, it might be in an hour, it might be in a week, it might be in a year, it might be in 10 years, but I can promise you, if there's something out there that we know that we shouldn't have done, there's a consequence that is going to come from that. Doesn't mean that God can't forgive you of it, but it does mean there's a consequence for what happened. Now, a circumstance is completely different, because a circumstance comes completely out of left field. I mean, you have no idea it's coming. Bam! There it is. I mean, a circumstance is like, I had nothing to do with that, but it could have drastically impacted you negatively. Can you imagine what it must have been like for Joseph to be sitting in a pit watching what his brothers are trying to decide to do with him? He makes every right decision, and he ends up getting sold into slavery. He makes every right decision for Potiphar, and he runs away from the temptation of being seduced by his wife, and he gets thrown in prison because she lied about it. And then one thing after another, but this circumstance comes out. And then the thing about it is I read through the Bible, the one thing that I saw is that nobody in the Bible, no Nobody in the Bible ever saw a circumstance coming. Ever. One time, Jesus knew the circumstance of one of his dearest friends was going to betray him. And he knew it was going to happen. And because he knew it was going to happen, the only person that ever saw a circumstance coming prayed this prayer. Lord, please take this cup. Not my will, yours be done. So the only time anybody saw a circumstance coming, Jesus prayed that it would go away. And here's the deal. As a result, I've never seen a circumstance that happened to anybody that God didn't use in a mighty way to make a major difference. When a circumstance comes your way, you need to be looking for the blessing. You need to be looking for what's coming next. Because I'm going to tell you, as I read that and I started thinking about that, I just want you to know, I just thought to myself, wow, this